Welcome all. Today we'll be discussing speedrunning code to cloud with the Azure Developer CLI with great Jason Taylor. So welcome, Jason. Thank you for coming and talking to us about AZD today.
Thanks. No worries, Luke. Great to be here.
This session, just some housekeeping, this session is just delivered on behalf of the Azure Cloud Commanders Learning Room. So you can find this learning room and others at aka.ms/learning rooms. We're a Microsoft Teams-based community, so you can come in and ask questions. We'll run sessions like this. We'll do things like exam vouchers, especially around those like Microsoft Build and Ignite timeframes as well. My room's focused on Azure infrastructure, but we've got rooms that are data, AI, Fabric, all that great stuff. So if it's free, feel free to visit that link and join. So this session is being recorded. So if you do not consent to being part of a recorded session, please disconnect your line. It's mainly for the people who can't make it because we'll need to leave halfway through. As attendees, your name is hidden in the recording. However, if you come off mute or have your camera on, your voice and video will be recorded, along with anything else that you may mention. So just try and be mindful of that and don't mention company names, etc. The recording will be published on YouTube later for those, and then the link shared in the learning room as well. But if you're watching this recording, you've obviously already found it. So yeah, this is just an inclusive session, so just be mindful of everyone around you. I'm sure Jason would agree. No question is a bad question. Everyone comes from different elements, and there might be people that work with AZD every single day, and then there might be people that are learning it new for the first time. I'll be monitoring the chat throughout, so feel free to ask any questions. Yeah, so today we've got Jason Taylor, solution architect, software engineer, .NET, Azure, Agile, Microsoft MVP from Australia. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks, Luke. Great to be here. I'll share my screen and we'll kick it off.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. So as Luke mentioned, I'm Jason Taylor. I'm a software engineer now at Particular Software, which is the team behind Service Bus, helping developers build reliable, scalable, and maintainable distributed systems. As Luke mentioned, I'm also a Microsoft MVP, and my category is Developer Technologies. So today we're going to be doing a speed run from code to cloud using the Azure Developer CLI, or AZD for short. I'm going to start with a quick introduction to AZD, and then I'll show you how to add AZD support to an existing app, how to create and configure CI/CD pipelines, how to build AZD templates, and finally putting it all together to speedrun the code to cloud journey. Let's dive in. So in case this is the first time that you're hearing about AZD, here's a quick intro. So the Azure Developer CLI is an open source tool that reduces the time and complexity required to take your application from local dev to cloud. It includes a range of developer-friendly commands that map to key stages of your workflow. So commands such as azd init to initialize a new application in your current directory, azd package to package an application's code to be deployed to Azure, azd provision the Azure resources for an application, deploy an application to Azure on top of those provisioned resources, and monitor to monitor a deployed application. Now, these are just 5 examples. AZD has a lot more commands built into it. So using AZD, you will gain access to templates which are designed to expedite your app development. And these templates contain the necessary configuration and infrastructure as code to create and connect to Azure services. Now, you can learn more at the site AwesomeAZD, or the URL shown there, aka.ms/awesome-azd. Let's have a look at that now. I'll jump over to the AwesomeAZD site on this screen. So you can see in this site, this is the main site that you'll come to when you're getting started with AZD. It includes the getting started documentation, information on how to contribute if you'd like to contribute a template or request that a template be added, and of course a link off to the Microsoft Learn documentation. Now, remember that each template is a fully working cloud-ready application deployable with the Azure Developer CLI. And these templates are all open source, and they're either authored by Microsoft or the community, with each being peer-reviewed by the AZD team. So you have some assurances there that these templates are of good quality and are following best practices. So let's try it now. We'll do a search. Coming down here to, let's see, framework, we'll choose React. Maybe we'll go .NET and C#, and let's have a look at this React web app with C# API and SQL database. So you can see if I click on there, it gives us a little bit of an overview of this template. And it says it's a blueprint for getting a React web app with the C# API backend and a SQL database onto Azure. And so the template includes some sample code, it includes some infrastructure as code, it includes pipelines as code. And to get up and running quickly, we just need a couple of commands. So from the command line, the terminal command, assuming that you have AZD installed, you just run AZD init. We can try that now. Let's go over to the command prompt. So I'm running Windows Terminal with PowerShell. And I'll go ahead and create a new directory called to-do C# SQL. We'll jump into that directory. And then using the instructions on the AZD site, we'll just copy that and paste it in. And so this is going to create a new solution within this directory, which is currently empty, based on the to-do C# SQL template, which we found. So you can see it's downloading the template code. It's requesting an environment name. So the environment name that we can give it is to-do dev. Now, it could be any name that we like, and you could map it to normal environment names such as development, staging, production. There we go. Okay. And so having done that, we now gain access to those developer-friendly commands that I introduced on the first slide. So AZD, package, provision, deploy, monitor, and configure pipeline, which we'll learn about later. So one command that I didn't mention is AZD up. And AZD up is a really cool command. It's basically a workflow that will run package, provision, and deploy in one step. So if we wanted to get the solution onto Azure straight away, we can just run AZD up. And so this template has built-in bicep infrastructure as code. So the first thing I need to do is choose my subscription. Next thing I need to do is choose the location. I'm going to select Australia East because that's pretty close to me. Okay, so now it's provisioning the resources. It will also package the solution, the application that we built, which is the React with a C# backend. And then it will go ahead and deploy that application using that package, all in one step. So this is going to take a little while, probably about 10 minutes or so. So we won't wait for it to finish. But regardless, you can see that this is the quickest way to get started with AZD. Now, admittedly, I didn't show you how to install AZD, but you'll find all of the information you need right here on Awesome AZD under Getting Started. Okay, let's jump back over to the slides. So what if we have an existing code base? So if we want to add support to an existing code base, I've prepared a simple ASP.NET Core Blazor application, and it runs on .NET 9 and leverages Entity Framework Core with SQL Server. So if we want to add support for AZD to this code base, we need, at a minimum, an infrastructure folder containing either Bicep or Terraform infrastructure as code. And we need a configuration file. In this case, it's azure.yaml. And this file is responsible for mapping our application and its services, such as a React frontend and an ASP.NET Core backend, to the provisioned resources. So maybe an Azure App Service. So in terms of cloud infrastructure for hosting this application, let's look at the Azure resources that are required to host a Blazor web app, and a SQL database. So we'll require a Azure App Service to host the Blazor web app, and so we'll need the App Service plan and the App Service to be created. We'll be using a SQL database for storage. So Azure SQL will be required, and we'll need to create the database as well. Key Vault will be used to securely store and access secrets, such as our connection strings to the database. To support logging and monitoring of this application, we'll need a log analytics workspace and an App Insights instance. And this might seem like a lot of work, and it is, but I'm going to show you how to do this easily using AZD. So let's add AZD support to our existing Blazor app. So we'll jump over to here. You can see the to-do demo that we started to provision is underway. It's already done the App Service plan, Log Analytics Workspace, Key Vault, and so on. And after that, it'll package and deploy the application. So this is my Blazor application that I've built, and it's just from .NET New Blazor. So I haven't done anything special except to add support for application insights and Key Vault into the application. So if I go ahead and run that, just take a moment, that'll launch and we can see what it looks like. While we're waiting for that, whoops.
This almost seems far too easy. There must be a catch, right?
That's the idea, right? And there's so much that we cover today. We're going to cover pipelines as code. We're going to cover infrastructure as code. We're going to have a play with using AZD. And it all is really easy. And it's a really great starting point. So if you don't have much experience in this area, then this is an easy way for you to go from code, local dev, to cloud, following best practices. You've got a template which has been peer reviewed by the AZD team. It's following best practices, using pipelines as code, using infrastructure as code. It's not a right-click publish solution. And so even if you don't know about these things, you can go from there and you can say, okay, well, today I'm going to learn Bicep. And so then you can jump on Microsoft Learn and start learning about Bicep, and you can slowly start to build out this knowledge. So even though what we're doing seems really easy, it's really foundational for what we should be doing. So yeah. All right. So this app is running. And if I bring that up, you can see typical Blazor app. I'm not even going to bother diving into this, but you can see it's got the hello world, it's got the counter so we can count things, and the weather forecast so we can generate random weather forecasts. But this is the app that we'd like to put on Azure, right? It's an existing app that we have, and now we want to make it AZD compatible. So how do we do that? From the command line, of course. So we'll kill that. And I'll get rid of that window so we don't get confused later on. Wait, that one. There we go. No, where's my PowerShell? Okay. So we'll drop back a couple of directories. So we're in the root directory of our AZD Blazor demo app. So the first thing that we're going to need to do is to add the infra folder with our infrastructure as code and the azure.yaml file, which is that configuration file. It maps our application services to resources on Azure. And we could do that by hand, of course, but AZD makes it very easy using the azd init command. So this time, instead of an empty directory, we've got an existing application. Now I have options there. I can use the code in the current directory. AZD will try to figure it out. That's the simple init method. But in this case, I want to go a little bit further. I want to do a bit of a deep dive where we actually build out the infrastructure as code ourselves from templates, and also create the azure.yaml file ourselves from snippets, just in the interest of time. So we'll select a template. And there's two really cool templates that you can use in this scenario that I like to use, which is the starter bicep template or the starter Terraform template. We're going to use bicep, and you can see that I can go ahead and filter just by typing, and we've zeroed in on the template we want really quickly. So that's going to download the template, and it says, hey, the following files are present both locally and in the template. It's talking about git ignore. And it says, what would you like to do? And I'm going to choose keep my existing files unchanged because I have everything exactly how I like it. And then it's asking for a new environment name. And so the environment name we'll choose for this one is going to be AZD Blazor demo, and success. It's all done. Now let's go git status and look at what's changed. Okay, so there's two things that have been modified. This was me earlier, just making sure it wasn't using a preview version of the .NET SDK, but this was AZD. It promised that it wouldn't change that file, but it went and changed it anyway, which is interesting. What it did was it added .azure to the ignore list, because as you'll see a little bit later on, .azure contains information about the environment. Actually, you can see that now, right? Yeah, there it is. So if we go in and jump into .azure, and whoops, we can see that there's this new folder which represents the environment that we created as part of the azd init command, and it's called azd Blazor demo. Now this is stored locally but used by azd. So if we were to go azd environment list, we could get a list of all of our environments. At the moment we only have one. And if we were to go AZD environment get values, we can see the values that are associated with the current environment. Later on, this will flesh out a lot more, and it'll have like key vault endpoints. It'll have locations, subscription IDs, tenant IDs as we start working with it. But back to git status, the things that it added was the dev container folder for cloud-hosted development environments, such as code spaces. It added the infra folder, which is the infrastructure as code in Bicep. Its starter infrastructure as code. We'll have to go in and define some resources and supporting services to host our web application, but it's a really good place to get started. We have the azure.yaml file, so defining the configuration for AZD, and the README, which contains lots of really useful information. You'll definitely want to have a browse through that when you're getting started. So first thing we need to do is we'll fire up code and we'll update the azure.yaml file. Let's bring that over to here. Okay, so the azure.yaml file at the moment is just an example. It doesn't define any services. So I have a snippet that we can use. There we go. So now I have an application which is named AZD Blazor Demo, and I have the opportunity to define one or more services. In this case, we just have a single service, which I've named Web. Its language is C#. You can see a list of other languages supported here. The project can be found in the source/web directory, and we're going to host it on an app service. You can see there's quite a number of other options that we could choose there. So that's enough configuration as far as Azure.yaml is concerned. Next, we'll go and try packaging. It's a good place that we can start since we've told AZD where to find our project. So that's the AZD package command. And it's essentially like a .NET publish for those of you familiar with .NET. But in this case, we're going to output it to a distribution folder or dist, and we'll just zip it up into services.zip. So you can see it even says it there, publishing .NET packet project. This won't take long. Give it a moment. And this is useful, say, if you're building out a pipeline and you'd like to package it, upload it as a, say, a GitHub artifact, and then deploy that same package to multiple environments. Okay, Not too bad. So we've essentially added AZD support. We haven't added support to deploy it to Azure yet, but we'll get to that. I might just go ahead and commit the changes that we've made. Not allowed. Cloud. Ah, there it is. Okay. So now we're going to go ahead and update the infrastructure as code because AZD can provision resources using this IAC written in either Bicep or Terraform. And for those of you who aren't familiar, infrastructure as code essentially lets you define resources and resource configuration in files, code files, that are designed to consistently create identical environments with each deployment. So you might be used to going to the Azure portal and clicking around and creating resources. This is a way to do it reliably and consistently every time, which is really useful when we have automated CI/CD pipelines and we might want to spin up environments for testing purposes or just be able to recover really quickly. Okay, so by using the starter bicep template, we actually get a lot of code built in. So if I just jump back over to the AZD Blazor demo, and I'll just zoom in. So we got this infra folder, but inside of that, there's quite a lot. There's core, which contains bicep modules copied from the AZD reference library. And I really love this. So for example, what's something easy? If we wanted to push a database to Azure, we have some really good starting points as far as these databases are concerned. So if I wanted to use PostgreSQL, I've got a bicep module ready for reuse where I can just call that, pass in the relevant parameters, and that will create that resource for me on Azure. If I wanted to say, for example, where is another one, host, I've got an app service, I've got an app service plan, I've got app settings, and this just makes it a lot easier if you're used to writing this sort of stuff by hand or searching the net to try and find a good resource. This is a good resource. This is just a great starting point. Let's see what else we've got. Monitoring for app insights and log analytics, CDNs, search, security, that's Key Vault, storage. What else have we got? It's a really great list. There it is. So there's a module for API management. If you're interested in that, make it quite easy to.
I was just
that.
making a comment in the chat as well about Azure verified modules and how you could probably come in and just they're just normal bicep or Terraform modules, right? So you could replace it with Azure verified modules or your own module library as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and look, this is just one option. Essentially, AZD is going to look for this main.bicep or the corresponding Terraform file. And so what you do from that point forward, that's up to you. So the other thing I really love is this abbreviations file. We can use that in our bicep files to use common abbreviations for our services. So if we wanted to create a resource group just for a really easy one, we can see that's RG-, which I really like having. I don't like to have some document somewhere which defines the abbreviations that is created by the company and maintained by the company. I'd rather Microsoft or someone else creates the abbreviations and we just follow that existing definition. So I really love that. Then we've got our main.bicep, which is our entry point, and our main.parameters.json, which provides parameters for this main.bicep file. So we'll dive in now and start to build this out a little bit. I'll add a lot of code and I'll explain it as I go, but we're not going to go deep into bicep. The idea today is to showcase a speed run from code to cloud with AZD. And hopefully, if you don't have some knowledge in bicep, you can go in and look into that. Or if you prefer to use Terraform, you can go and look into that. But you'll have a good idea about how AZD ties all of these things together. All right, so the first thing that I want to do is add a folder for my services. And then I'll add a new module for my only service, which is web.bicep. Now I've got a snippet there, which I'm going to use. So you can see I've defined a whole bunch of parameters. And then within this application, I'm going to set up monitoring, which is going to include Log Analytics Workspace, Application Insights, and also a dashboard. And these things are happening using this monitoring module. So it's a lot that happens just using this module because it's doing all of the heavy lifting for us. You know, the fact that we've specified a parameter for Application Insights dashboard name means it'll go off and create a dashboard on top of App Insights for us. And so if we wanted to F12 into that, we can see, yeah, this is in the core monitoring.bicep, and we can see, yeah, it's going to set up log analytics, application insights. It's going to provide the dashboard name parameter through to here. And if we dive into that, it's going to look into this one, which will actually provision App Insights. And if we supplied a dashboard name, it'll go and provision a dashboard for us. Now, this is our code now, right? Just because it came from the Azure Reference Library doesn't mean we can't change it. This belongs to our solution. And so if we need to customize how monitoring.bicep works to suit our own purposes, that's the idea behind infrastructure as code. You'll use this as a starting point and build it out to meet your requirements. All right, so let's just dive back to web.bicep. So there's monitoring, there's our app service plan, there's our app service, and some output parameters, which will be passed back to main.bicep. So this will be running on .NET Core 9. So we'll take a little bit more time running through main.bicep. So you can see as input, we have the environment name and the location, and they're actually coming from AZD, from AZD's environment variables. So you can see Azure environment name and Azure location. The other ones are optional, which we can supply if we like, or we can use as the defaults. Now, I do need a few more. So I'm going to go and bring in AZD main parameters, and that's going to bring in principal ID, which is essentially the ID of the user being me, the user of AZD in the command line, or the app to assign application roles. The app would come into it when we have, say, GitHub Actions deploying to Azure, and there's a service principal to represent the app. So it'd be a different ID depending on where it's running. Is it running locally with AZD through the command line, or is it running as part of a pipeline using Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions? We also have a SQL admin password for creating tables and those sort of things for the database that we'll be using, and an app user password, which is how our Blazor application will connect to SQL Server, and it won't have DBO type access or DB owner access, so it'll be a little bit more restricted. We're loading up our abbreviations. We've got some tags that we can apply to all resources. So we've got AZD environment name, which will apply to all resources. And then we've got our resource token. Now, this is something that you're typically going to remove once you get up and running, but essentially it's a random string that we can apply to resource names so that when we deploy for the first time, we don't have any conflicts. And I'm going to leave it today because I don't want the demo to fail. There's a lot of moving parts. But normally I'd go and change this and just delete resource name, change it to project name, give it a name, and then just update the references in this file. All right, so next thing we're going to do is to name the service that's defined in azure.yaml. I'll add a snippet for that. And our service is named web, right? And we're going to use this parameter to tag to the app service the actual service name. And that's got to line up with what's in azure.yaml, which is this one. Okay, you can see our resource group is going to be created. Our resource group name will be empty because I'm not going to supply it a name, which means it'll use the resource group name abbreviation followed by the environment name. So in our case, that would be rg-azd Blazor demo. And now in this section, this is where we can go and add our call to our web module, and also to add supporting services such as SQL Server and Key Vault. So I'll go ahead and do that. So here's our call to our web module. You can see that we're passing through the location and through the tags, but inside of the web module with our tags, we actually go ahead and add the AZD service name to it as well, just so that AZD can see that the service has been deployed or not. It just matches those two things together. We've got our log analytics names, app insights name, dashboard name, app service plan name, and app service name. And these are all just abbreviation followed by resource token. So we'll have some strange names, but works well enough for demo purposes. You'll see Key Vault's got a squiggly. That's because we haven't defined that resource yet. So we'll go ahead and add our supporting services, which includes, Key Vault, the Key Vault access for the website. So this is the app service web identity principal name, because when we created the app service, actually no, don't worry, we won't dive into that. So essentially, the app service has an identity, and we're telling Key Vault it can access that Key Vault. So, and then we have our database, which is SQL Server. We're also supplying a Key Vault name here, and a connection string key, and a SQL admin password, and an app user password. So it's going to do quite a lot for us. So you can see if we come into here, it'll create SQL Server. It'll supply the administrator login, which is SQL admin, and the SQL admin password. It's going to create our database for us. It's going to open up a firewall for us, which is great for testing purposes. It means that we can have direct access to the database, at least in development, but you probably want to tighten that up for production. And then we have this SQL deployment script, and the SQL deployment script is going to go ahead and add in the app user. It's going to make sure that the app user is created, that it has the right password, and that it has the role. Oh, it is DB owner in this case. So I was thinking it's not DB owner, but it is. You could restrict that further as well, depending on your requirements. So it'll go and run that. And then it's going to go ahead and add the SQL admin password secret to Key Vault, the app user password secret to Key Vault, and the connection string secret to Key Vault. And that's the resource Key Vault there. It's not being created here. It's just referencing the existing resource. And you can see we output connection string key and database name from this module. All right, let's see. So going back to main.bicep. So we've created our web service. We've created our supporting resources. Let's include some outputs. So we'll output the Azure Key Vault name and the service web URI, and that'll actually be available to us when we go azd env get values. So we'll have a look at that later. And the final thing I need to do is just add some parameters here. So we created up the top here, we created three new parameters. Let's see, principal ID, SQL admin password, app user password. I'm actually going to get AZD to supply values for those parameters, because you can see we don't have defaults except for this one, but I'll get AZD to supply all three. So this is right. Okay. So the Azure principal ID will come from AZD, being either myself or a pipeline. The SQL admin password, I really like this function. So this is the secret or random password function, which is built into AZD. And so it's going to get the existing password from Key Vault, or it'll generate a new password if the Key Vault doesn't exist yet. And so how does it get the existing password? Well, it's based on this environment variable Azure Key Vault name. So when we create that variable and we return it at the bottom here, that tells it the location of the Key Vault so that it can go and look it up using our principal ID and actually retrieve that secret. And if it can't find it, then it'll generate a random password. So that's really nice for us. We don't have to generate any kind of random password in our bicep. We don't have to store it in an environment variable or type it in manually. We don't even really need to see what it is. Just kind of cool. Okay, let me see. I think that's everything. So we'll go ahead and commit our changes. Git add, and we'll go ahead and commit, and we'll use bricks for infrastructure. Update info. Okay. So now if we want to provision these resources, then we do that using the azd provision command. Now we can use preview if we like to get an idea of what will happen if we were to provision these resources. It's a good way to test that the bicep that you've created is working. It'll give a little bit of a test there, a little bit of a sanity check, and we can also then see if it would make any changes to our existing infrastructure. We don't have any existing infrastructure. I'm not really worried about that, so I'm just going to go ahead and run azd provision. Give it some time. So this is the second or third command. So the first one was azd init, which we used to add the starter bicep template. The second one was azd package, which we used to package our application into a zip file. And this third one is azd provision to provision the resources to Azure. I'll select my subscription, and then it'll ask me for a location. I'll choose Australia East. And then I'll go ahead and start the deploy.
I was just remarking in chat about how I'm going to start adding emoticons into all my Git comments now.
I love it. Have you seen Gitmoji?
No, but yeah.
I must bring up Gitmoji for most of the presentations I give because I'm always using it. So yeah, if you're doing a commit and it's for a bug, there's a bug, fix a bug. If you're creating a new feature, then you can use Sparkles.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. If you're changing, where is it? Adding or updating the CI build system, you use the construction worker. And if you're drunk, then you write code drunkenly.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've now officially bookmarked it. So yeah.
Yeah, it certainly makes your commit history look very pretty. All right, let's see how that's going. That's good. So it's going ahead and it's creating all of those resources for us. And once that's finished, we can then run azd deploy to deploy the packaged application to Azure. And if we ran azd deploy from package like this, then it will use the one that we pre-packaged earlier. If we run azd deploy without any arguments, then it would actually first package and then deploy the application. So there's little tips and tricks that you can use to optimize your development workflow. So we could wait for this to finish and then run deploy. But I think it's probably better for us to come back to it because I have one that we deployed earlier anyway, of course. So yeah, I think we won't wait for that one to finish. But let's go over and have a look at the one that I deployed earlier and just have a look at some of the other commands that would be available to us once it's deployed. So if we went azd environment get values, then we can see a list of all of the things that are associated with this environment now. So you can see the key vault names there and the web URI is there. And I can, using Windows Terminal, I can control click on that and go straight to that application hosted on Azure. So that's quite nice to have. Back over here, I can go azd environment list to see the existing environments. There's only one. I can also create new environments. Let's see, help. So I can create a new environment and then I can change environments. I can say select this environment or select that environment. I can change environment settings. I can get specific values, which can be useful when you're scripting. Yeah, it's really handy to have that information available. Now I can also run commands such as azd monitor, which will fire up that application insights dashboard for us. You know, we don't have to click through the Azure portal to find the location for this. We can just jump straight to it from the command line, which I really like. So obviously there's not much happening because I just deployed this one this morning, not so long ago, but it's pretty cool. But AZD monitor has a bunch of other commands. So I can go AZD monitor live, and that'll jump me straight to the App Insights live metrics. Or I can go AZD logs, which will jump me to the App Insights logs. And as we continue to develop our application, anytime I change the infrastructure as code, I can run AZD provision, and I can provision whatever changes need to be made to my resources. If I change my application code, then I can run AZD deploy again as many times as I want, and it'll go ahead and start a new deployment, in this case to the app service. And don't forget, we have commands such as AZD up, where it'll kind of package, provision, and deploy the application all in one step. And if we want to tear it down, if we're not using that environment anymore, we can run AZD down. And if we're feeling brave and it's not a Friday afternoon, we can force that, and we can purge key vaults all in one step, which is great for sandbox environments. But hopefully you don't have access to do that for production environments anyway. So that's about it. So yeah, we've got the resources provisioned. So we'll run AZD deploy from the package, but we won't wait around for that to finish because we've got the one that we created earlier. But just so that you can see all of the steps to add AZD support to an existing application and push it to the cloud. Okay, let's continue. All right, so I've shown you how to provision deploy resources now using AZD commands, and this approach is really great for a quick demo on a sandbox environment. The next step is to automate the process so that when new changes are pushed to the main branch, a CI/CD pipeline triggers and updates our environment with the latest changes. Now, AZD includes built-in support for GitHub Actions and Azure pipelines, and templates typically include a default pipeline definition file, with the exception of, say, the Bicep starter template and the Terraform starter template, and that's because they don't actually contain any application code to deploy. But I'll show you how AZD brings default pipelines in anyway. So once you do have a default pipeline template, it's easy for you to change that to suit your requirements and to build on it. It'll start you off with a single environment deploy, but you can build it out and make it a multiple environment deploy relatively easy. And I've got resources that I can share with you on that if that's something that you need to do. So when your pipeline definition, I'm falling behind here. So when your pipeline definition is ready, you can use AZD's built-in support for automatic pipeline configuration using the AZD pipeline config command, which is a really cool command because it does so much for you. So it will create, if necessary, and configure a GitHub or Azure DevOps repository. If you don't have one already in your AZD template, it will provide you with a starter pipeline definition, so you don't have to build that from scratch. It will go ahead and set the required variables and secrets for the pipeline, say in GitHub, and it will set up, creates and configures a service principal in Azure so that the pipeline can securely connect to Azure to deploy those resources. And it will also set up the necessary federated credentials so that it can establish that secure connection between your pipeline provider or your repository and Azure. Now, of course, it's worth noting that you can manually create your own pipeline definition. You can configure it yourself. You can set up your repository yourself. So it's not limited to just GitHub Actions and Azure DevOps. You can use a different provider if you like. You just won't have that built-in support for automatic pipeline configuration, which obviously makes it really quick and easy to create and configure your CI/CD pipeline. All right, let's dive into the demo for this one. And for this one, we'll be using the application that we deployed earlier. So it's basically continuing on from this one where the deploy has completed successfully, and now we'd like to set up a pipeline. Okay, so as I mentioned, the command that we're going to use is azd pipeline config. And you can see here I've chosen the provider GitHub. So we'll be using GitHub Actions. And I've chosen auth type federated. We can choose client credentials or federated for GitHub Actions, but we'll choose federated because it's more secure. And most importantly, we've given it a principal name. If we don't give it a principal name, AZD will choose one for us, and it's horrendous. It's something like AZD 2025 01 29 15 23 47. So it's basically a date timestamp, and that's not going to look very nice inside of Enter ID, and your cloud solution architect's probably not going to be very happy with you. So don't do that. Give it your own default. Let's see. So before we run that, let's see. So what will this command do exactly? So in order for us to get our pipeline established and to get it able to deploy Azure resources, we need to create a new GitHub repository. We need to create a basic pipeline workflow for GitHub Actions. And this pipeline, the definition is going to include steps or actions to use AZD to package, provision, and deploy our app to Azure. We need to configure the pipeline to connect securely to Azure, and we need to configure the GitHub repository with the necessary pipeline variables and secrets. So let me see. I'll go ahead and create a repo first, I think. So GitHub repo create. So this is going to create a new public repository using the current directory as the source code, and it'll throw up some options for us. So I know all defaults. So if I click on this now, or if I just go GitHub browse, that'll load up the repo that we just created, which is empty at this stage. So if we now want to, we could push those changes through, or actually we can just run AZD pipeline config and that will do it for us. So let's run that. It says the default Azure dev.yaml file, which contains a basic workflow to help get you started, is missing from the project. So this is not the Azure YAML file that we looked at later, which is AZD configuration. This is the GitHub Actions workflow, which would be in GitHub Workflows, Azure dev.yaml. So it's offering to create that for us because we don't have one, which is really cool. And it would also do that for Azure DevOps. So would you like to add it now? Yes. So it's going to go ahead and do that for us. Okay, so now it's creating the GitHub pipeline. It's ensuring that we actually have Git running in the current directory. If not, it would prompt us to get all of that set up. It's created the service principal on Azure, SP AZD Blazor. It's created the federated credentials for pull requests and for changes to main. And then it's added variables to our GitHub repo for the Azure environment name, Azure location, Azure subscription ID, tenant ID, and client ID, which it's now populated using the values from our local environment. And it's asking us, would you like to commit and push local changes to start the configured pipeline? I'm going to say yes, heck yes, we do. And so you can see that that workflow really does a lot for us and saves us a lot of time, but it's doing everything the right way still. So let's have a look in GitHub and see some of those changes that are made. So if we go back to the start, here's our AZD Blazor demo, which it's now pushed the changes through. This is the pipeline that it created for us, so the Azure dev.yaml. It's going to start if we trigger it manually or if we push a change through to main. It defines the necessary permissions for connecting with Azure federated credentials. And it has all of the environment variables, which it's pulling in from GitHub. And then it has a few steps. So you can see it's going to check out the code. It's going to install AZD because it's using AZD in the pipeline. That run actually failed. We'll figure out why in a sec. I know that because I had my phone beside me and it just came and told me that it failed. So sad face, but we'll figure it out. So install AZD, then log into Azure using federated credentials. then provision the infrastructure and deploy the application. So you see there's not a specific step there for package. We could add that later, but because we're using AZD deploy and we didn't specify a package to use, it'll first package and then deploy that package. Let's have a peek here at what went wrong. Let's see. Build, provision infrastructure, provisioning infrastructure, initializing service web failed to initialize secrets at project web.cs proj. The command will not be loaded. Wonder if there's like a secrets ID in the project that somehow got snuck in. Let's have a look. Source. I haven't seen that error before, but I'm guessing that this is here, and I'm just not sure if that's what it's referring to. Feel free to jump in if you know. Let's see. You know, it actually might be not that. It might be that it's not using the correct .NET SDK. And so we could adjust the pipeline to specify which SDK version to use. Because this, or it might be, no, because that's specifying version 9 there. And we've got our global.json, which is specifying version 9, but I'm not confident that that's necessarily being applied. Now, if we have a look at the pipeline that was created, I don't think there is a specification. We'll go back to code to see that. So it's in GitHub workflows, Azure dev.yaml. I don't think there's a specification there to use a certain version of .NET. So we might go.
Is it installed by default on those runners? I don't know.
I hope so. I think it is, but it might not. Yeah, it might not be specifically using it because the error there seemed to indicate that an earlier version. Just looking at this, and so I think if we can just update the pipeline briefly to see, I see this, and I don't know what the 80112. Yeah, requested SDK version is good. As per global.json, and it's installed, but this error is happening a little bit earlier in this perhaps in this AZD provision. So look, it'll take us a second to give that a try, and hopefully we'll get it up and running. But if not, we'll move on, and I can share the solution with the room later. So let's give that a try. So global.json. So we have
it sounds like something that you'd potentially in a more production-y scenario is run like Dependabot or something across to keep those dependencies up to date.
Yeah, I agree. I've got a repo that I created which actually has this exact step in it. So we'll just go and grab the step from there rather than trying to get it right. Install, yeah. So you can see here, we'll specify to install .NET before we do any of the AZD stuff, and we're going to tell it to use the global JSON file for the appropriate version. So I'll copy that to my clipboard. We'll pop it in here and just make sure that all of those spaces are right. Okay, and we can go ahead and commit those changes. So now this is construction worker, right? So we fixed the CI/CD pipeline. And we'll go ahead and push that through. And because we're pushing directly to main at this stage, that's going to trigger our workflow. So we'll go back over and have a look. And hopefully that fixes it. If not, I'll take it offline. I'll figure out what went wrong and I'll let you know. So this is the install. It says the installed version is 8012, which is the one that we saw before. And now it says the install version is 90102, which is good. It's logging in, which it did successfully before, so that's good. And now it's provisioning, and I think this is where it failed. It probably failed pretty quickly, so hopefully will either succeed quickly or fail quickly. Once we see it start to provision resources, I think it's getting further than it did last time. How long is it? 24 seconds it's been running for. So creating and updating resources. I'm going to jump in and just check the other one to see how long it ran for before it failed. It looked like it failed very quickly. Yeah, it failed almost immediately. So that was it. There was some step in there. I'll just close that one. Inside of the provision being triggered that was using the wrong version of the .NET SDK, and so we were able to fix that simply by specifying that it should use the correct version of the .NET SDK as defined in global.json, which is here. All right. So that's going to take a few minutes, maybe 4 or 5 minutes, and then the deploy of the application is going to take up to 10 minutes. It's quicker than that, but sometimes it takes a little while for Azure to report back to AZD that the deployment has succeeded, and so it kind of just waits a little bit too long. So if you're looking at the portal, you can usually see it come up a little bit quicker than what it does here. I hope that they fine-tune that in the future. Okay, let's see. So we've had a look at the pipeline. We fixed the pipeline because that wasn't working. Let's have a look inside of, where's my, hang on a sec. Let's have a look inside of the settings here, just to peek at the secrets and variables for GitHub Actions. And you can see we have this AZD initial environment configuration, which is something you can leverage to supply some initial information before GitHub Actions runs. But these were the variables that were created as part of the pipeline being configured. And so you can see all of those variables that we were looking at a moment ago, and those are then leveraged by the pipeline. Okay, you can also go over to Azure Portal. We can see this was the one that we actually started from scratch, and this is the one that we continued with. And so you can see all of those resources have been provisioned. And if we go into Entra, we can see the service principal that was created to represent this application that will be used by the pipeline, which is this one, and that contains the necessary credentials and has been granted necessary authorization to access Key Vault and deploy the application and that sort of thing. So there we go. All right. So let's continue. We'll check to see if it's finished. It does take a while, but we'll have a quick peek. So yeah, it's still underway. It's provisioning the infrastructure. It looks like it's pretty much done with that. Yeah, so now it's moved on to deploy the application. So it'll package it first, as you can see here, and then deploy it. And we're not going to wait around for that. Let's continue. Right, so next one is creating AZD templates. So creating an AZD template essentially provides a solid foundation specific to your technology stack and tools. And an AZD template is just a sample repository which is created using AZD conventions. And the AZD conventions simply specify the template structure. So we have our dev container, which is configuration for a cloud development environment, such as GitHub code spaces. We have our GitHub or AZDO folders, which contains our pipelines as code. We have our infra, our IAC for creating and configuring Azure resources. We have our source. In my case, that's where I'm keeping my application source code. And we have Azure.yaml, which is the AZD configuration. Now, at a minimum for your template, you just need infra and Azure.yaml. Okay. If you want to host your template on GitHub, then you can create new apps using the azd init command and specifying the repository URL. Okay, so it's quite easy to leverage your templates from azd. You don't have to do anything special there. And when you combine the azd CLI with your own custom azd template using your technology stack with your preferred frameworks and tools, then this provides a really solid foundation that allows you to speedrun your journey from code to cloud. And that brings us to our final demo. So speedrunning code to cloud with azd templates. Let me bring up the PowerShell. Where is it gone? There it is. So we'll need a new directory. Maybe we'll actually I'll close this one. PowerShell. This is good. Okay. So let's look now to a time in the future, a time where we've established our specialization. We know exactly what stack we want to build in and how we want to do it. And we've built or located a number of templates that align with our specialization. And I want you to imagine it's your first day on a project. It's 9 a.m. Specialists start late. They work around 9 a.m. But you've got a meeting at 10 a.m. So obviously it's time for a coffee now, right? But first we need to get something up and running. We need something to show for the work that we're doing for our client. And so in this final demo, I'm going to show you how to leverage the project that we just built as a reusable azd template. As you know, the process of creating the template just required that we make it azd compatible in that it correctly aligns with the azd conventions. And that's something we've already done. Our azd Blazor repository that we've been working on, that we've now published to GitHub, is an azd template because it aligns with those conventions. It has the necessary files and folders. So now let's try creating a new project based on our azd template. And this is the speed run. So let's bring up a clock. All right. We've got a stopwatch. I'll try to pin that. Is that should pin? Yeah, great. I'll make it a little bit smaller. Okay, so we're ready? Here we go. So first thing we want to do is create a directory, and we'll jump into that directory. Now, we want to use our template, so we can run azd init template, our GitHub handle, mine's Jason Taylor Dev, and our template name, azd Blazor demo. Okay, so it's going to use that template and initialize in the current directory. We'll give it an environment name. Our environment name is going to be speedrun dev. Done. Next command we need to run is azd pipeline config. We can't forget to give the service principal a name, and we'll call it speedrun dev because this principal is specific to this environment, right? We'd have other principals for staging and production. Okay. And so when I run that, it's going to do everything else for us. And it's a lot. So the first thing is, which subscription do you want to use? Next thing is, which location? Then it's going to say, hey, you know what? You don't even have a Git repository yet. You want to do something about that? We'll go, yeah, heck yes. So we'll create a new private GitHub repository, and we'll enter a name for it, or just choose the default, which is called speedrun. And so now it's going to go and set up the service principal, set up the federated credentials, configure the repository that it's just created with the necessary variables. And then it's going to ask us if we want to commit and push those changes. The default is yes, so we can just press enter. And it's done. We can now go GitHub browse. And our solution is up there. And the actions have triggered. We know that pipeline works because this is our specialization. We fix the bugs in it. And yeah, it's coffee time in under 2 minutes. So I think this is really cool. And the reason I think it's cool is it's using all of the best practices. We're using the infrastructure as code. We're using pipelines as code. This is not a shortcut. It's just a really great tool that aligns with our development workflow. And so to do all of that, in under 2 minutes is a really great starting point. And it's not the end. We're going to build on the infrastructure as code. We're going to build on the pipelines as code. But what's important there is that we hit the ground running and we did things the right way. We didn't take shortcuts.
That's pretty epic. I've had some success with going a step further as well with using GitHub code spaces.
Oh, nice.
Just opening up the code space and then having the code space with AZD installed. And so like you're running from the same sort of environment. You don't need AZD installed. It's installed in the code space. It makes it a hell of a lot easier. Like it's
so
great.
Cool. You do that from your iPad, right?
Maybe. Well, I sit on the and pretend that I'm working. No. Yeah. But you could if you were then. Yeah.
Easier if your iPad has a keyboard, but yeah, you can do that from the coffee shop while you drink your coffee. All right, let's continue. Okay, so in the past, my goal when starting a new project was to be able to go from code to cloud in 45 minutes, and now I'm speedrunning it in less than 2 minutes, perhaps while I'm making a coffee or shortly after I'll go and grab a coffee. So today I showed you how to get started with AZD, how to add support to an existing code base, how to create and configure CI/CD pipelines, and how to speedrun your journey from code to cloud with AZD templates. And more than anything, I hope that I've shown you that AZD is not a shortcut. It's not right-click publish. AZD is a tool that's infused with best practices and completely aligned to your development workflow. There's so much more to AZD that I don't really have time to cover in this session. I think we're already a little bit over time, but I've got the following resources for you. So you can snap the QR code and gain access to a list of these resources. The first is Awesome AZD, and this is where you can find Getting Started and the docs. It's, of course, an open source AZD template gallery, but it also contains information on how you can contribute, which you shouldn't overlook, because there you can find information on contributing a new template, if that's something that you'd like to do, but you can also find information on requesting a new template. So if all of this is kind of a little bit far in the future for you, you've got a lot to learn in regards to bicep and pipelines as code and all that sort of thing, you can actually submit a request for a template. And if that's something that is valuable to the broader developer community, then that issue can be picked up by a contributor or can be picked up by the AZD team, and they can create that template. You can also, of course, use it to submit a bug report or request a new feature. There's many different ways to contribute. So then there's a link to the AZD documentation. Really awesome AZD has that link. There's the AZD learning path. So if you wanted to spend a little bit more time creating your own template, this learning path will take you through a number of different modules in order to do that, to build your template from scratch. Then, of course, you can choose Azure DevOps if that suits you better, or Terraform if that suits you. If you're new to Azure, definitely check out the Azure free trial. You get some free credits, which will help you get up and running and start playing with these things. And if you'd like to check out the template that we built today, you can go across to my GitHub repo and check out the AZD Blazor template. That's currently running on .NET 8, but I'll go ahead and upgrade it to .NET 9 sometime this week. All right, I hope you found this session useful and gained some valuable insights into using AZD. If you have any questions or want to continue the conversation, feel free to reach out to me at Connect Jason Taylor Dev. That's a list of my socials. I'll also join the learning room so that you can ask me questions there. And that's it. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you, Jason, for coming in and talking to us today. I like the fact that it's not only just about you could use it to learn how to do infrastructure as code, but like I'm just thinking if I wanted to learn about container apps or AKS or or Azure OpenAI, it's instead of having to click through the portal and recreate it every single time, I could just run an AZD up and there's my thing, get rid of it, and then you only need the resources when you need it. This is great. Thank you.
Yeah, that's it. You're very welcome. And on that point, only using the resources when you need it. With your CI/CD pipeline set up, and even if you extend it to a multi-stage pipeline like you've done, we were talking earlier with one of your projects, you can even just delete dev and staging when it's not running, because that pipeline will re-provision those resources. So this is really cool, a really cool way to manage it with AZD.
I think
All
I'll
right,
stop recording, but
no problem. Hey, you